Hey, what's up? My name is Scott Tolinski, and I'm going to be talking to you about GraphQL Tools. Now, I use quite a bit of GraphQL Tools in my own workflow all the time. In fact, a lot of what you're going to be seeing today is things that I use daily. So what we're going to be doing here is talking specifically about the different types of tools that you can use to improve or augment how you work with GraphQL and Apollo, because I personally use Apollo in our code base. So it's important to know that all of these things work very well with Apollo, and many of them work specifically with Apollo. So that said, who am I and why am I here? Well, you got why I'm here, but who am I? My name is Scott Tolinski, as I said, and I am the creator of Level Up Tutorials. That's leveluptutorials.com for those of you who are wondering. And that is, in fact, where we're going to be looking at a lot of the code today. This is the site Level Up Tutorials. This is built in Meteor with Apollo as the API. So I created Level Up Tutorials, which is a huge repository of tutorials. I make a new tutorial series every single month. There is just way too many to be counted. It's funny, some of the logos are a little off here because this is our development environment, but we do have courses like custom React hooks or even how to make a GraphQL API, which focuses primarily on the server side of things. In fact, maybe a course on GraphQL tooling would be really nice to have. We also have courses on design and full stack React and animating and all sorts of really neat stuff. So if you're interested in learning any of these skills, check out leveluptutorials.com. Okay. Enough of that advertisement. I also co-host the podcast Syntax with Wes Boss. So many of you may know Wes for his work in the JavaScript world, and he also works quite a bit with GraphQL. So you hear us talk about GraphQL all the time on Syntax. So if you want to check out Syntax, check out syntax.fm is the website where we release 2 episodes a week. One longer one shorter one, and we primarily teach. We're both teachers, so it makes sense that our podcast is entirely focused on teaching new skills. So that's who I am. Let's get into this talk because I love GraphQL, and it has been really nice in our project. Now, our code base is TypeScript, so a lot of the code that you're going to be seeing in this is TypeScript based, but it works just as well with things that aren't TypeScript. The benefits of having TypeScript, though, in a project like this is that you have types up and down the stack. Our API is typed, our server-side code is typed, the resolvers are typed, our front-end code is all typed, the React is typed. Therefore, everything always knows what it is all the time. So a lot of the code base and tools that you're going to be seeing, not all of them, but many of them are going to be from directly leveluptutorials.com's actual code base. In fact, I have the code base open right here. You can see this is one of our types. So we're going to be talking quite a bit about this code base in general, and I'll do my best to navigate this thing elegantly, considering I did create it. So I will be going and diving through and talking about stuff specifically that we use in our code base and how it can be used in your code base to help you write really efficient and really nice GraphQL. Again, there will be more benefits here for the TypeScript users, but keep in mind that we used many of these tools before our project was in TypeScript because, of course, our project was not built in TypeScript. It wasn't even built in React initially. This thing's gone through a large transformation. But I do want to emphasize that its current iteration of types up and down the stack is by far the best one so far. So where are we going to start with GraphQL tools? Now, in my opinion, there are too many excellent tools on this website to list. The Guild is a group of developers who create GraphQL projects that you can use. And I say here, GraphQL CodeGen will change your life. Emphasis on will. It will change your life. So there are so many wonderful things in here, but GraphQL CodeGen by far is the one that you're going to take the closest look at. That and maybe GraphQL Tools. Either way, there's a ton of amazing stuff here. So if we head to their website, this is what it looks like. We are the Guild. They do consulting and training and engineering and open source. Now, I don't have any connection. This is not necessarily an advertisement. I have used so many of their tools that I must say that like these people are doing some amazing work here. So check out the-guild.dev. You can see here are their open source projects. So this is really where you're going to want to look at some of these tools. And so first up on our list of wonderful tools from the Guild is GraphQL CodeGen. Now, this talk may be a little bit lopsided because this thing is massive, okay? GraphQL CodeGen is very, very massive and very, very good. So let's dive into why it is good, and we can actually check out in our Level Up Tutorials codebase our CodeGen file and see what it outputs. Now, our CodeGen file is maybe not necessarily complete. I do want to emphasize that, like, these things are always changing for us. So if you notice something that could be better in our CodeGen file, we probably have already noticed it ourselves. But you know, with any of these things, it's a big change to make. So what is GraphQL Code Generator? Well, GraphQL-code-generator.com. You can change the night mode or day mode here. I typically like dark mode, but for the sake of this video, I'll probably leave it in light mode here so we can see. Now you can see that this is got this guild banner. It's got this neat illustration, and everything looks pretty cool here. And the promise of a GraphQL CodeGen certainly sounds nice, right? But what does this thing do? Well, it takes in a GraphQL file, such as something like this, and it can spit out a whole lot. It can spit out your TypeScript types up and down the stack. So imagine never having to write a TypeScript type on the front end or the back end for your entire GraphQL project. You just import the type and it's typed correctly. It knows what it's looking for. And the types are massive, right? There's just so much here. So if you're using TypeScript, that benefit alone should make you extremely happy or extremely curious because, yes, generated code can get a little hairy sometimes, but let me tell you, this has just been endlessly important for us to get stuff done fast. But not only will it generate your types, it can also generate much more than that, right? Generate your types for your resolvers, types for your front end, but it will also generate your React hooks for Apollo so that you just import the hook that's already created. No more importing use query and then having to import your query and putting your query into your code. Well, you get to actually have an imported query. And the best part is those are all typed as well. So if you use TypeScript, it's sort of doing everything for you, which is fantastic. But this may seem like an advertisement. I have no connection to this thing. I just use and love it, okay? So that seems great, right? But maybe you're not using Apollo. Maybe you're not using TypeScript. Maybe you're not using this or that. Have no fear. This thing is, like I said, massive. So let's get into it here. The installation process is really just creating a CodeGen file. So you initialize it with npx GraphQL CodeGen init. That's going to create a CodeGen file for you. And then you just need to write a script that runs GraphQL CodeGen, such as this, npm run generate, and it's going to look at the CodeGen YAML file and it's going to do some work. So before we get into the plugins, let's take a look at what we're using this for. So I'm going to head to my CodeGen. I think it's called CodeGen, CodeGen.yaml. If you're wondering, this color scheme is called Retrion. A lot of people ask about this. In fact, we can even do color themes. Retrion, R-E-T-R-E-O-N. Something that people ask about, okay? So we have Retrion here, and this is my CodeGen YAML file. You'll notice we use a couple of plugins because plugins are really the lifeblood of this thing, right? Now, we could output these into multiple files if we wanted to, but right now we're just sort of dumping it into one large file. And in the future, we'll probably have different files for types and resolvers and whatever, right? Because we don't need all that stuff in one file, but that's the way it is. So what are we doing here? Well, we're saying each time you run this CodeGen, overwrite it. Seems fair, right? Next, we have a schema where instead of passing in the actual schema, we're passing in a location to the API that's running. That way it hits the API that's actually running. You can actually pass this in the schema itself as well I don't know if there's any benefits to doing it either way. This way has just worked fine for us, right? Next, we have the documents. Now, this is where you tell GraphQL CodeGen where your GraphQL code is living. And I say, hey, look for anything in this entire project that has a .graphql file. You'll notice, let's see. Sorry, this opened up my npm folders. Let's say we head to the checkout process. Any of these, right? The create subscription, right? This is a mutation that we wrote. It's a GraphQL file, and CodeGen is going to find that and generate the types for it. So this generates is going to say, okay, well, what are we going to generate? Well, for us, it's going to output everything into one file. Like I said, not ideal, probably going to be changed at some point. Either way, it's outputting into one file, types generated.ts. We'll take a look at that file. We have some configuration, okay? The context type is interesting because we're passing in the user context, which means that we have a custom type defined for our context, which is going to be our user. That way we can get our user data passed along to all of this stuff. We're also saying, hey, use React Apollo version 3. That's what we're using. With hooks, true. With higher order components, false. You can have this output a lot of stuff, right? Using hooks, yes, you get your hooks. You use higher order components, you get your higher order components. You got it, right? A lot of neat stuff. Next, we're telling you the plugins that we're using. TypeScript, TypeScript operations, TypeScript React Apollo, which gives us our hooks, and then TypeScript resolvers, which gives us our types. Okay, so let's see some of this in action here. In fact, we can even, I think I have the site running right now. So if I run, I can just do npm run, and then it's CodeGen. You can see this is going to hit this. It's going to create our regenerate it. And that's that. Some people can set this up on an action or do it on commits or deploys or something. I personally just run it manually because I don't change the API that much. Okay, so we have this. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the stuff that it outputs. For instance, we have our tutorials here, and we have maybe a resolvers file. Now, the resolvers file is just like we would expect with any GraphQL resolvers. We are exporting an object of resolvers, and inside of that, we have our query, and then we get to nail down which specific query we are resolving, right? Now, what's neat about this for us is that because we use all the generated, we can simply just import resolvers, as in, hey, all of the resolvers from types generated, and say, hey, you know these tutorial resolvers? These are using the resolvers type. Now, the best part about that is all of your arguments, all of your context, everything in your resolvers is now typed. And you can see action of this by, let me just change one of these. I can save it. Property yo does not exist on required fields, query all tutorials. You only get limit and filter. Wow. Wow. Imagine, right? Imagine. Now, it cleans up your code so much because now you're never going to, if you make a change to your API, TypeScript's going to yell at you. If you try to do something interesting, TypeScript's going to yell at you without having those proper changes. It's fantastic. I cannot emphasize this enough. Look at how easy that is. Oh, yes. Okay, very cool, right? So that's just the server side. And on the front end side of things, we also can do, let's do a fun one here. This is some admin code. Let's not look at that. Let's look at, I might have some TS errors in here, so I'm trying to augment what I'm showing you so that my code looks nicer. So let's take a look at, I kind of like some of this stuff in the My account. So let's say that's a bad one. My downloads. Okay, so My downloads is interesting because when a user creates an account on Level Up Tutorials, or they're a pro account, they get access to all of the downloads on the entire site. They can download anything you want, right? What's neat about this is that before, what we would have to do is import, where's the user downloads, whatever GraphQL file that we have, user downloads query. So we would have to import this file, and then we would have to import use query from GraphQL, right? Now, sorry about this, I lost my file. Now, the bummer about that, let me go back. Now, the bummer about that is that, well, then we have to like type all of this stuff ourselves because sure, GraphQL types it, but GraphQL CodeGen types it to your API exactly in a way that is recognized throughout the entire API. So now the minimal types that we have to import is just user downloads query, which is just our query here, our hook. And if we inspect this hook, this is what's generated: export function user download. And look at this. It's all just set up for you. Use Apollo, use query, and it's all correctly typed with Apollo everything, including you got your documents if you need access to your documents. So much cool stuff here. Now, I could go on and on and on about this stuff, but let's take a look at some of the plugins that exist. Because, like I said, you might not be running when I'm running. And if we look at the plugins for GraphQL Code Generator, let your jaw hit the floor. Oh my, right? Look at how many of these things there are. TypeScript React Apollo, TypeScript Vue Apollo, TypeScript Urkel. You use an Urkel, they got you. Stencil even. TypeScript MongoDB, which even though we're using Mongo, we're not using this one. Maybe an opportunity, right? TypeScript GraphQL file modules. So many cool things. Add any string you wish to the output file. Schema AST. Fragment matcher, named operations, introspection, even just little simple things like adding the generation time to the output file, whatever. But if you're not a web dev, fear not. We have ones for Kotlin, Java, Java resolvers, Java Apollo, Android. Wow. If it sounds like I'm excited about this, I am, because I use so much of this stuff that is unbelievable. So if you check out these plugins, we have everything. So if you check out these plugins, they have everything from TypeScript, Flow, Reason, Java, .NET utilities. Okay. And let's talk about GraphQL ESLint, which is another fantastic tool here from this team. GraphQL ESLint is a way to lint your GraphQL files. You can see they have little unloads. It works with ESLint. Thank you. ESLint is fantastic, which I use personally. So it's nice to be able to use ESLint as one tool instead of adding a whole other tool. It works on your .graphql files or GQL, which many people use. And it lints your schema and its operations. It validates and prettifies and checks your GraphQL schema. So it's an easy drop-in, integrates with VS Code and WebStorm. This is an easy drop-in into your project. You can see the setup is mostly just adding it as a config here. It's an easy drop-in, and it works. All the available rules, you can augment it and change it just like any other ESLint plugin. So I highly recommend giving this one a look. Okay, next is going to be GraphQL Tools, which gives you some really interesting things. Now, the things that we use out of this are specifically the schema merging, resolver merging, and mocking. Now, sometimes, let me open this up in a new tab, and let's take a look at our code again. Now, sometimes when you are creating an API, let me say Apollo resolvers, GraphQL resolvers. That's what we named the file. So sometimes when you're creating maybe your resolvers, sometimes you don't know what to do here. In fact, we just did a simple low-dash merge to merge all of our resolvers, right? But if you look at the type definitions, there can be some issues with type definitions when you're trying to merge them. In fact, in the past, we had done something similar with a low-dash merge. But what you end up having is, let's say you have one type defined somewhere else, and as a query, and another type defined somewhere else as a query. Now, if you don't put the extend keyword in there, GraphQL is going to complain that you have multiple query resolvers defined, or multiple query types defined, not resolvers. And that's really obnoxious to anyone who's getting into this. They may think, what do I got to create all the queries in one type? That's crazy. And it is crazy, and I wouldn't do it, right? So what GraphQL Tools gives you is this neat merge type defs, which means that you don't have to even think about it. For instance, let me see one of these, a query. Sorry, let's do a GraphQL. Let's do posts maybe. You can see that we have extend type query, and that's really legacy code. We could get rid of this extend in here, and because we're using the GraphQL tools, it's just going to work. It's going to merge them for you without you having to think about it. Now, another thing that we use here is the mocking tools. Now, our mocking setup for tests is pretty extensive, and I won't be able to get through all of it, but it's pretty neat, and I want to at least show you a little bit of it. I built this thing Now, this thing is called mockmang, okay? The name is obviously a joke, but what does this thing do? Well, it uses some tools. For instance, it uses add mocks to schema from GraphQL Tools, and it uses make executable schema from GraphQL Tools, not from Apollo. Reason being, what we're doing here is we're importing our entire API. So we're importing all of our queries in here. So we're importing all of our type definitions. And what we end up doing is, let's scroll down to the good stuff here, is we make a schema using our type definitions. So what we do is we make a schema of our type definitions. We add some overrides to our mocks using these mocks here. And then what happens in the mockmang function is that we can then call GraphQL with our mocked schema. Okay, these other properties, we don't need to worry too much about them. They're just allowing us to pass in variables and whatever. And then we're setting the data loading to be false because this is going to spit out a fake amount of data for anything that you want. As in, by calling this function, all we have to do is pass in a query, which will then just get put into this GraphQL function and then variables, and it's going to spit out mocked fake data that is going to be of your own API. Because your entire API is typed, it's going to fill in strings with strings and whatever, making it super easy. And at the same time, we can override any sort of mocks that we want. For instance, date just always ends up being a new date. Or we have like an ID or a created at, things that we're looking for in our tests specifically. Now, another cool thing I did is I took that mocked provider, which you will need in your tests, and I wrapped it around the memory router and the context provider and the helmet provider or whatever, and I made this test wrapper. So anytime in any of our tests whatsoever, all we have to do, in fact, let me find one of our tests for this. Any of our tests. So what's cool about this is that any of our tests that exist, you'll see some TypeScript errors in here, my apologies. Any of our tests that we ever want, all we have to do is, because this is an Apollo project, we all know that testing in Apollo is great for some things, but and sometimes there can be some really frustration where your API is headbutting with what it's expected and the errors aren't coming in correctly and you got to do all this stuff. So what we do is we run our prepare mocks function, which basically allows us to pass an array of all of the queries that we're expecting. Now this is receipt document. This was generated by GraphQL CodeGen, and receipt document is really just a GQL of the query itself. So this is really just a GraphQL query. We're passing in the variables we want to see. This is the target receipt ID, and it's going to spit us out fake data, tons of fake data. In fact, fake data that we can then test against. So we can check to make sure that things like the order number on the receipt is equal to the actual order number from the mock data. That way we know the mock data is actually hitting a real fake API in our code and spitting out the right data. So these are some of the GraphQL tools that exist in here. But if that stuff doesn't really get you going, there is a ton of stuff in here. Let me see. So generating an executable schema, resolvers, custom scalars and enums, and there's just a lot of neat stuff here. Schema directives, directive resolvers, schema delegation. You could spend an entire day reading through this documentation, and I highly recommend you do, because even though we're only using a tiny bit of this stuff in our application, there's so much more that I would prefer to use if given the opportunity. Okay, so this is the GraphQL Tools repo. Now, there's some more tools, many of which we might even know. And I'm sorry for the guild because there's more here, like GraphQL Mesh. I just would be talking about this stuff all day. GraphQL modules, GraphQL Inspector. Inspector is kind of neat because it's useful in your continuous integration tools. So again, check all this stuff out, and let's get into Playground, okay? Now, Playground, as you may know, is basically an upgraded version of GraphiQL. Now, Playground can be installed in any project, and if you're using Apollo, it's the default. Now, Playground is really neat because you can have multiple queries and mutations. You can have them saved as tabs, and there's some neat settings in here where you can adjust how this thing looks. I prefer the dark mode myself. And what's neat, we get information about our entire API. For instance, if you want to learn and examine your API, you have the documentation for your entire API right here. This is a tool that I never close. I always have this open while I'm working every single time. And it is one of the things that I cannot live without when working in GraphQL. Next up is Apollo Studio. Now, again, this is not an advertisement for Apollo. I get that this is Apollo Day, but Apollo Studio is a really fantastic tool to have in your tool belt. Now, while Apollo Tool is fantastic, most of the features that are like really neat, you have to pay for. And we're not currently paying for Apollo Studio, but it is one of those things I would really love to get going. In fact, we did use Apollo Engine when it was called Apollo Engine quite significantly. And what this can do is show you how fast or slow your operations are, giving you opportunities to augment your API in a way to make it better. We all know that the N+1 issue is a potential for working with GraphQL APIs. When you have a schema that is a nested schema with a nested schema with a nested schema and an array, you might end up with 100 database calls before you know it. And tools like this are imperative to identifying those kind of issues. Next is GraphQL Voyager. Now, this is a really neat one that we're not currently using, but I would love to use something like this. I'm a visual person. In fact, my first programming language was something called Max MSP, and it looked exactly like this, which is actually kind of funny to think of a programming language looking like this, but it was all patch cables and boxes. And what this does is it allows you to see your API in a visual way. And let me zoom in here. So for instance, we have the root. These are all of our queries here. All right, we want to see what a film is. Well, hey, we got a link to the film. A film has these options. And what kind of connections does a film have? And you can see it has outgoing connections. And it labels these connections with these little, this icon here. Let me even zoom in more if I can, where it says that a species connection is a species. Now, a species will then link you up to this one, and it'll show the arrow. You can click on any of these arrows, and while this does look like a little bit of a mess, I am really into this kind of thing. I love visual tools, and this one to me is one of the coolest. There's another tool that's like this. In fact, let me find it here in my long list. I think it's now GraphQL Voyager is on GitHub, so you can check this thing out. And as you can see, it's a pretty neat project. This is just the live demo that I was showing you. We're not currently using this. However, you can install it and get it going in your own project and play around with it. Really neat stuff. Now, along the same lines as the one that I was actually looking for is GraphQL Editor. Now, I have also not used this one, but GraphQL Editor is a little bit more of an opportunity to see your GraphQL schema visually, but at the same time edit it. Which is a fantastic idea. And in fact, a lot of these things are really neat here. In practice, I would like to spend more time on it, but GraphQL Editor is a really neat tool to take a look at. There is pricing. You can see that there is a $0 starter plan with 2 projects. It's a 14-day, or you can get a free trial here. I have no affiliation with them. But you can see that it is a paid product if you want to get into some of the hosted nice stuff. However, I believe, if I'm not wrong, you can install it locally as well. So those of you who prefer not to use tools like that, I think you can install it locally. Yeah, develop for standalone use. So you can use it locally if you want, or you can pay to use it in the cloud. So these are my favorite GraphQL tools to show you. Again, a lot of this stuff is used very heavily by us, and we really love all these tools to make our coding experience better. I know I said it was lopsided because I was going to spend a ton of time on the code generator. And in fact, that is really my favorite thing. In fact, if I could do a whole talk on code generator as well as GraphQL tools, but unfortunately we don't have the time. So this is my favorite GraphQL tools. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope you learned a lot about some neat stuff that can augment your code base, whether or not you're using TypeScript or React or whatever. Like I mentioned, our code base is actually React on the front end, Meteor on the back end, GraphQL for the API, and it's fantastic. Everything plays so well and works very lovely. So if you want to ask me anything about GraphQL, level up tutorials, or syntax, you can catch me on the social medias at Tolinski at leveluptuts, leveluptutorials.com, scotttolinski.com, or syntax.fm I'm all over the place. The best place maybe Twitter, whatever. So I'm all over the place. So hit me up and ask me anything about GraphQL, or even better yet, head to the Level Up Tutorials Discord, which a link is available on the leveluptutorials.com site. There is a join us on Discord and you can connect. You can see there's 200 some people on right now talking code. So thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is Scott Tolinski, and thank you. I hope you have a great time at Apollo Day. And thank you so much to Apollo for inviting me to speak here. Again, I hope you learned quite a bit. Thank you.